All right, welcome back to another episode of the Always Adaptive Podcast. I'm your host, Randall James. I'm a strength and running coach based out of Rolesville, North Carolina, sort of near Raleigh. And today I want to talk about cardio. So this is a really important topic to me. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because this is one of the most polarized topics when it comes to hypertrophy bodybuilders, strength training, all this stuff, where there are people out there that actually think that cardio is harmful to you. There are people out there that actually think that you don't need to do any cardio. And I think this is downright harmful. And I'm here to make a case for cardio. Now, the reason why I've touched on this in the past, but I keep seeing stuff pop up like this in comment section. And I even had an experience of my own comment section where there was a debate breakdown that I did for the Jubilee natural bodybuilders versus steroid user bodybuilders. And in that video, Eric Janicki, who is the host, he's a massive guy. He has a lot of muscle mass on him, incredible physique, incredibly strong, great dude. I think he puts a lot of really good content out there. But in that video, one of the questions was asked, is there a such thing as too much muscle? And both sides kind of weighed in, did their thing. But Eric Janicki even chimes in and says he himself believes he has too much muscle. And then he announced his plans to sort of downsize. He says, at 35 years old, I'm probably going to take the Greg Doucette route, downsize a bit, start to get into cardio because Greg Doucette is a cyclist. And I think that's a really good idea. So I posted a video about that, a short, and someone commented on it. And I'm going to read these comments so you get a sense of this and just how much these people hate cardio. And they really do believe, I think they do believe this. So he says, 35, bro, I'm 42 and huge. Cardio kills your heart and reduces lifespan. What? Like, where are you getting that from? But anyway, so I said, I appreciate your perspective. Your anecdote is duly noted. However, there's a saying, do what's optimal, not what you can get away with. You're getting away with being huge. Who knows for how much longer? Just because you made it to 42 doesn't mean you'll make it to 45. Either way, it takes time to build a strong VO2 max, and I think he's smart for cutting back so early. That ensures he has enough time to build up just like you would in resistance training. VO2 max is strongly correlated with a longer lifespan, by the way. And I'm going to prove that in this video, by the way. So he goes on, do you even know why humans age? Explain to me why old men stand up slowly. Explain to me what muscle fiber type is lost first due to aging, fast twitch muscle fibers. Explain to me quad muscle size to life expectancy. Larger quad muscle size translates to longer life. Explain to me grip strength to life expectancy. Higher grip strength, longer life. Explain to me cardiovascular exercise and scarring of the heart muscle. Excessive lifelong endurance athletes do have scarring, a higher calcium score, stenosis, a narrowing of the arteries. We're going to get into that. But there's the dose decides the poison. So he's partly correct, but this is where we need nuance because the dose decides the poison with everything, with lifting weights, all kinds of other stuff. Explain to me life forms with the slowest metabolism having the longest life expectancy. Then explain to me the effects of cardiovascular exercise on metabolism. I will finish with this so you can edify yourself in your own time. How much muscle does an average Western male lose per year after the age of 50? About 1% per year. And what is the number one killer of the elderly? Falls, but cardiovascular disease. Let's not forget about that. You know, if we're talking about, he's talking about just the elderly, but cardiovascular disease is the number one killer. So, and what prevents cardiovascular disease? I really wonder. If you answer both of those questions honestly, you will know that muscle is lost year over year after the age of 50. And that the number one leading factor in elderly death is fall-related injuries caused by, drumroll please, muscle wasting / loss. So the bottom line is simple: build as much muscle as possible before 50 and work hard to keep as much as you can, as long as you can. So this is just such a simplistic take, man. And I'm just like, it like really drives me up a wall when people don't have any sort of nuance. Like, you can have both. You realize that, right? Like, you can build a good amount. Like, I have a good amount of muscle. I weigh 108, I hover between 182 and like 187. I'm 6 feet tall. I have a lot of muscle on my frame and I have fantastic cardio. Why can't you do both? I'm not going to lose my muscle. All the things that he's talking about here, how we lose muscle, time after time, that's been shown that is largely mitigated as long as you resistance train. So you don't need to like build an excessive amount of muscle where you're 60 pounds overweight with just hulking huge muscles because you're going to lose 1% of that every single year and then you're going to be super frail. No, if you build a moderate amount of muscle and maintain that, studies show that maintaining muscle is very easy. You do not have to do much. Once you have the muscle, just keeping it at maintenance is a perfectly fine way to go. And getting up to that requisite amount of muscle and then working on your cardiovascular health, you should do both. But this is a perfect example of how there's no more nuance today. Everyone is so flippin' polarized. And, I get attacked all the time because, people have called me a fence sitter, or, I don't take a strong stance on things. And that's because I never believe the answer is on one side. I think it's always smack dab in the middle. I think there's truth to all of this stuff. My friend Physionic, he posted something in his stories talking about the longevity crowd and how people like Dr. Walter Longo, they recommend or believe that we should be having only 10% or less of our calories from protein. So that's so absurd to me, and is just another example of the lack of nuance. But let's talk about the polarity of this. So what about the carnivore folks? So you have on one side, people like Dr. Walter Longo saying 10% or less of calories from protein. And then you have people on the carnivore side where 80% plus of their calories are coming from protein. And those people are touting longevity. Now, they don't really have the science to back up what they're saying. Neither does Dr. Longo. He's using more indirect metrics. Like, there isn't really a study that is showing that increase in protein intake equals a loss of years off of your life. That doesn't exist. So neither side can say for certain, which, okay, so what do? We go somewhere in the middle where 80% is probably excessive, 10% is probably not enough. So how about we do 1 gram per pound of lean body mass, as most studies show is the, sort of the best amount required to build muscle. Makes sense to me. But then you have carnivore versus vegans. Once again, polarity, the camps that are just at each other's throat. Carnivores all meat, vegans all vegetables. These people don't like each other. They're constantly at each other's throat. And then you have bodybuilders saying that you just need to get as massive as possible, like this guy that commented on my video, and that cardio is bad. And then meanwhile, you have the endurance community saying that weight training is worthless and that you don't need it, and who cares? It's not going to improve your running performance, and it's not going to improve your longevity. And you have people demonizing sugar while others are saying that sugar is completely fine no matter what the source is. So go ahead and eat your Oreos and eat all this other garbage. You're perfectly fine. A calorie is a calorie. And the answer is somewhere in the middle. Like, yeah, you can eat some sugar. It's not the end of the world. I eat sugar. I drink Gatorades here and there for my running performance. Or, I'll eat a bowl of Cheerios if I'm running low on time, and I'll put a protein shake in the bowl of Cheerios. So it's like, it depends on, do I have time to cook some eggs and some ham and all this stuff? If not, then okay, I got to rely on easy sources of carbs, because those of you that are familiar with REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport, carbohydrate intake is usually cited as the number one reason why people develop issues like amenorrhea or osteoporosis. So I think people underestimate their carbohydrate intake, and especially for someone like me who does a lot, like I work out a lot and I walk a lot. I'm very active. I'm on my feet basically all day. But the takeaway here is that all these camps at least have a little bit of truth to them. And I think being so polarized, having these polar opposites, it's not doing anyone any favors. Being too big will decrease your longevity to a certain point. Yes, having too much muscle on your frame is metabolically expensive. It requires more oxygen. It requires more blood. Your heart rate's going to be elevated needlessly so when you're just sitting at rest. You're sitting on a couch and your heart rate's 80 because you have all this mass on your body, when in reality, your heart rate should be 60. You go up a flight of stairs and your heart rate elevates to 120 when it should only stay at about 80 or 85 or so. Like, I take a walk, my walking heart rate is in the mid 70s. I know people who they take walks, their walking heart rate is 130, 140. That's my running heartbeat. That's like if I want to run 8 slow miles, my heart rate's at 145, 150 or something like that. Having good cardio to me, or having bad cardio rather, increases the likelihood that some mundane task like going up the stairs or something is going to produce a cardiac event. And you could see that if someone's heart rate is being needlessly elevated because of something small, that's not a good thing. They should be able to accomplish their task and have it not be such a stressor on their heart. But to me, the way that I think about it is like, check as many boxes as possible. And I like to think of a good, better, best principle where you don't let best be the enemy of good. Like, I check the strength training box, the hypertrophy box, the power development box, where I do train power development at least 2 to 3 times a week using kettlebell swings and snatches and things of that nature. And I check the cardio box, and I'm doing different types of cardio. And I by no means think that the program that I personally am following is the best program, but it is a good program, and it allows me to check as many boxes as possible. That is going to ensure that I'm going to be strong when I'm older. I'm going to be fast as fuck when I'm older. I'm going to have great cardio when I'm older. These are all things that are accounting for, you're talking about 99% of the reason why you're going to live a long life is all of that stuff. And then you get into sort of like the supplements that the longevity crowd talks about and all this other extra stuff that, okay, it might add a year, one single year to your life, maybe two, but it's not that big of a deal. But, the other thing that pisses me off is like the appeal to authority, where people just assume like, oh, I'm a doctor, I know what I'm talking about. Or someone will say, oh, this person's a doctor, I'm going to believe them. And that's fine. But I think it would do everyone a lot of good if they, one, started asking a lot of questions, two, purposefully sought out both polar opposites and thought about what that middle position is for all of it. If you're a carnivore and you talk crap about vegans, what's in the middle of that? Carbs aren't evil. I've talked about this before. Carbs aren't like the originator of disease or anything. So you can have carbohydrates in your diet without it making you feel cruddy. Like if you're eating carbohydrates and you're feeling like crap afterwards, chances are you ate too many. Instead of eating 60 grams of carbs, have you ever tried to eat 30? Have you ever tried to have just like a 1 or 2 cupped palms of some rice? Like not that much at all. That you will feel perfectly okay after that. You're not going to feel lethargic and like you're crashing. People run into issues because they're chugging a whole Gatorade in one sitting, or they're eating a whole entire bowl of rice or 4 servings of potatoes or something, or pasta, where it'll be minimal chicken and an entire plate of pasta. So it's like a 3-to-1 ratio of pasta to chicken. Yeah, you're going to feel like crap after that. But if you have a little bit, I think you'll be fine. But just to show that I'm not biased, I'm going to prove this guy's own point. I'm going to back him up when he says too much that cardio kills. He's half right. The dose decides the poison, as I said earlier. So this is a study entitled Lifelong Endurance Exercise and its Relation with Coronary Atherosclerosis. And the study was looking at calcium scores and stenosis specifically. What the study found, just some quick stats. I'm not going to do a deep dive because we have some other studies that we need to talk about in support of cardio. I'd rather spend more time on that and then give you guys some protocols that you can use to help improve your VO2 max, to help improve your cardio. But quick stats, plaque numbers. So there were lifelong athletes. They were late onset athletes. So athletes that started later in life. They weren't like athletes when they were younger. And then you have non-athletes as the control group. Lifelong athletes had 2 plaques on average. Late onset athletes had 1 plaque on average, and non-athletes had 0 plaques. Now, what's normal? 0 plaques is ideal, of course, but 1 to 2 plaques is still considered normal with aging. So it depends on what the ages were for these individuals. 3 or more plaques is considered elevated risk. Now, what's also important is what type of plaques these are. But we're going to talk about calcium score. Lifelong athletes had an average score of 8.5. Late onset athletes had an average score of 1.3, and non-athletes had a range of 0. So once again, lifelong athletes had a higher calcium score. Now, what's a good score? 0 is no detectable plaque. 1 to 99 is mild plaque buildup. So even the lifelong athletes, even though they had more than non-athletes, it still wasn't high. It was just slightly elevated. It's not bad, but it's just worth noting that athletes had more plaques and had a higher calcium score. And then moderate plaque buildup would be 100 to 399. So they weren't even in that category. So let's talk about artery narrowing or stenosis. So this one was a little bit different. So how much the arteries are blocked. Lifelong athletes were 2.8 times more likely to have 50% narrowing in any artery. They were almost 6 times more likely to have narrowing in a major artery. Now, what's normal? Less than 50% narrowing is mild, usually not a major concern. 50 to 69% narrowing, moderate risk, needs monitoring. And then greater than or equal to 70% narrowing, severe narrowing, high risk for heart attacks. So once again, lifelong athletes had higher than non-athletes, but not necessarily dangerous levels for most of them. Again, there's a little bit of variability there. Now, don't panic about this, because one good thing about the lifelong athletes is that they had a different type of plaque that was less likely to rupture. So it was actually a calcified plaque. But that being said, the fact that they had more plaques in the first place is still concerning. So that's just to support his position. And there are more data out there supporting that chronic endurance, lifelong endurance athletes do tend to have more calcium, more scarring, all kinds of different things. So this is why whenever I'm working with someone to train them for a marathon or a half marathon, I'm happy to do so. But I always tell them that, hey, we can do this, But I don't want you to think that this is a healthy thing, because it's not. Running a marathon is not healthy. It's extremely stressful on your heart, particularly the last 6 miles, 6 to 8 miles, depending on, their pacing and all that stuff. But, the first 15 miles, 12 to 15 miles might be sort of a cakewalk for most. And that's intentionally, they're running slower on purpose. But as they go and go and go, the race gets harder and harder. So there's people out there that say it's a 20-mile warm up and a 6-mile race is really what a marathon is. And I think that's pretty accurate, where, yeah, the last 6 miles, their heart rate's going to be really elevated, likely in the 180s, 170s, 180s, depending on their age and their maximum heart rate. But it is very stressful. And in fact, it's very common. You'll hear people dropping dead at a race, or people will experience heart issues or like little weird pains, flutters, weird things in their heart during a training program where they're training for a marathon or a half marathon. Very common. I know someone really recently, a couple of weeks ago, I won't name them. Yeah, they had out on a run. They had to stop after the first, I think it was a couple miles, because they had a heart pain that was severe enough that it made them not continue anymore. Now, they're doing fine now, and they finished their training block and they have a race this weekend, and I'm sure they're going to do fine. But that is the price you pay for performance. If you're pushing performance out too much, you're getting away from longevity. The dose decides the poison, right? So anyways, now that we got that out of the way, so you can be sure I'm not being biased, I am open to all opinions, and I will do my due diligence and research what people say when they make a claim, as everyone should. If you're willing to say something online on the internet for everyone to see, you should have some evidence to back up what you're saying, and you should look into what people are saying, and not just believe it. But anyways, so study number one, in support, we're going to do 2 studies. Study number one, this is called the Association of Cardiorespiratory Fitness with Long-Term Mortality Among Adults Undergoing Exercise Treadmill Testing. This is out of JAMA. So firstly, before we get into this study, they were measuring METs, which is a metabolic equivalent of task. Now, it's a unit used to measure the energy cost of physical activity. One MET is defined as the amount of oxygen the body consumes at rest, which is approximately 3.5 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute. So how METs work is they would be basically a measure of intensity. 1 MET would be your resting metabolic rate, sitting quietly. 3 METs would be walking at a moderate pace, 3 miles per hour or so, maybe slower for some people. 6 METs equals jogging, 5 miles per hour or so, and 10 plus METs equals high intensity exercise, sprinting, fast cycling, etc. Now, this is totally subjective, because they say 10 plus METs is high intensity exercise. That's not high intensity exercise for someone like me, or people that run races, people that do cardio very frequently. I mean, matter of fact, I was just doing an elliptical session and I was hitting 10 METs easy on that. It could show you your METs or your miles per hour. And I had it on an incline and I was going pretty fast. But I could have done that for over an hour. So 10 METs might not be high intensity exercise for some people. It depends on the individual. Now, how did they measure METs? So they measured achieved METs based on their treadmill performance. So during the treadmill test, their METs were initially estimated based on speed and incline at peak exertion using established metabolic equations for treadmill workloads. So that's very similar to what I was just talking about on the elliptical. On the elliptical, as I increased the incline, it automatically increased my METs, taking into account the speed that I was going at. And then what they did was compare achieved METs versus estimated METs of what they should hit based off of their age and an equation that they had. And then they showed a percentage of that. So the formulas they used for men was 18.7 minus 0.15 times their age. And for women, it was 14.7 minus 0.13 times their age. They then used an equation to see what the percentage was by having their achieved METs divided by their estimated METs, and then they multiplied that by 100, and whatever that number was the percentage that they were at. Now, I'm going to show you this graph that I had ChatGPT put together based off of the statistics in the study. And you can see there's 5 different categories: low, below average, above average, high, and elite. Now, one limitation right off the bat is that they shouldn't have had such large categories for below and above average. There should have been a 6th category in the middle for average, or around average, maybe 5 points above and below, around that. So automatically that's sort of skewing this a little bit, but just in general, so they have you at the 25th percentile if you're below 6 METs. 6 to 9 METs is the 25th to the 49th percentile. 10 to 11 METs, that was my easy cardio session earlier today, put me in the 50 to 74th percentile, Now, that was easy. I know for a fact I can hit greater than 15, which would put me, especially if I was running, it would put me higher than what they have for the elite. But so for high, they have 12 to 13 METs, putting you in the 75th to 97th percentile. And then for greater than or equal to 14 METs has you at the 97th percentile. So let's talk about the hazard ratio, which is like the percentage increase or decrease of your risk from all-cause mortality based off of which category the person ends up in. So for low, people had a 400% higher risk. Baseline was the above average group. Now, again, that's sort of messed up because they're above average. So doesn't that sort of skew how much worse the lowest group would be as compared to, it wouldn't be 400% higher risk if they just compared it to average, not that 25 point above average group. Now, below average would have them at 41% higher risk versus above average. Baseline was above average, so that's 1, hazard ratio of 1. The high group had a 23% lower risk versus above average, and then the elite group had an 80% lower risk versus the low group. So pretty clear delineation between the low group and the elite group. And you can see based off of that graph, again, that it is a linear increase between all-cause mortality risk and your cardiorespiratory fitness based off of the METs. Now, study number 2 I want to talk about is entitled Midlife Cardiorespiratory Fitness and the Long-Term Risk of Mortality, 46 Years of Follow-Up. Long-term. That's awesome. So there were 5,100 men in this study, and they estimated their VO2 max using a bicycle ergometer. And the stratification was sort of similar to what they had in the other study, but below lower limit of normal, lowest 5%, low normal 45%, high normal 45%, and then above upper limit of normal, top 5%. Higher VO2 max equaled increased longevity. No surprise there. But compared to the lowest 5% fitness group, the mean life expectancy increased by 2.1 years for low normal, 2.9 years for high normal, and 4.9 years for above upper limit cardiorespiratory fitness. Every unit increase in VO2 max adds 45 days of life. This means even small improvements in cardiorespiratory fitness translate into measurable longevity gains. Now, you might say, well, 45 days, that's not that much. Well, think about if someone has poor cardiorespiratory fitness, let's say they're at 20, their VO2 max is 20 or 25 or something like that, and then they get up to 45, which that's not an unusual increase. If someone really works hard at their VO2 max, they could go from 25 to 45, maybe within a year if they're really following a smart training protocol. And we're going to get into some training protocols here in a moment. But cardiovascular specific mortality showed the same trend as all-cause mortality. Higher VO2 max significantly reduced cardiovascular related deaths. Now, limitations of this, men only, no women. So of course, and then VO2 max was estimated, not directly measured. So of course, that's going to be a major limitation as well. But there are other studies. Once again, like this is just 2, and I'm not cherry picking. This is like if you Google search or if you use ChatGPT or another research assistant AI you can use, it is called Elicit with an E, and that allows you to type in a research question. That's a tool that I use often. You type in your research question and it lays out the studies and it'll summarize all of the studies that it's showing, and you can go in and pick the specific studies and dive deeper into them, and you can pick exclusion and inclusion criteria. You can kind of do your own meta-analysis using it, which is nice. But the vast majority of studies out there show that good cardiorespiratory fitness has a decrease in all-cause mortality from cardiovascular events. So to me, this is like it's not even up for debate. But the only caveat is, again, chronic endurance athletes that run races frequently, that are constantly pushing the limits of what their body is capable of, that is not healthy. So the dose decides the poison. You can do too much cardio, but doing no cardio is not good at all. Now, how do you improve your VO2 max? Your VO2 max is the volume of oxygen that you can consume and disperse to the various tissues. And there are studies where they look at different protocols to see which one improves that volume. And the big one that everyone's talking about is the 4x4 protocol, where they work hard for 4 minutes at 90 to 95% of their max heart rate, and then they rest for 4 minutes. This study is entitled The Aerobic High Intensity Intervals Improve VO2 Max More Than Moderate Training. This is out of Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise. So there are some things that I really like about this study, but there's also some things that I don't like, which we'll get into in a moment. But sample size, 40 mil, subjects, age range approximately 18 to 30 years old. And these are moderately trained individuals. So right there, that's sort of an issue. I'll get into why in a moment. Randomized control trial, check. Duration 8 weeks, okay. And training sessions conducted 3 times per week. They were randomly assigned to one of 4 groups. You had your long, slow distance, which was classified as around 70% of their maximal heart rate for 45 minutes of continuous running per session. You had your lactate threshold group, which lactate threshold is a pace that you can run where once you hit the threshold, your body can no longer clear lactate. In a nutshell, lactate is a fuel source of the body. It continually builds up in the blood and your body is constantly clearing it out. There gets a point where you're running too fast, your body can't keep up with it anymore, and you start to get that buildup, and you start to have to slow down due to a buildup of byproducts, hydrogen, and all this other stuff. But for them, it was classified as around 85% of their heart rate max, and they were going for 24.25 minutes of continuous running per session. They did a 15-15 interval training run, which 15 seconds of running at 90 to 95, followed by 15 seconds of active rest at 70% of heart rate. And they did a total of 47 repetitions, amounting to about 23.5 minutes per session. And then you have the King protocol, which was the 4x4 minute interval training protocol, which was 4 intervals, each lasting 4 minutes at 90 to 95% of their heart rate max, where the recovery interval was 3 minutes of active rest at 70% of heart rate max between, and then 16 minutes per session. So for VO2 max improvements, the 4x4 interval group had a 7.2% increase in their VO2 max, going from 55.5 to 60.4. The 15x15 interval group had a 5.5 increase, going from 60.5 to 64.4. The long, slow distance group had about a 1 point increase, small but meaningful, because their VO2 maxes are already really high. As you just saw, like 55 or 60.5, that's high. That's not like, these are no slouches. And then you have the lactate threshold group, which again had around a 1 point increase in their VO2 max. Same thing, modest, very small, but it means more when their VO2 maxes are at that level, because as you train and you become more advanced, it becomes increasingly harder to improve your VO2 max. So when you first start running, you're going to make a lot of progress pretty quickly. Within a few months, you'll probably, if you're, again, following a smart training protocol, you'll probably experience a 5 to 10 point increase, depending on where you're starting, in, as little as 3 to 6 months. And as you get higher and higher, those gains are harder to come by. And then lastly, they looked at their heart rate, which was categorized under running economy, and the long, slow distance, their pre-training heart rate, average heart rate was 150, and then post-training it was 140. Lactate threshold group, pre-training 151, after was 137, so a 14 beats per minute drop. The 15x15 intervals, pre-training is 147, afterwards 125, so a 22 beats per minute drop. And then the 4x4 interval pre-training was 154, afterwards 136, so an 18 beats per minute drop. Something to take note of here. The long, slow group, they were only running for 45 minutes. That's not long, especially for these people that their VO2 maxes are already pretty high. Most people that have a VO2 max in the 50s and 60s, you're talking about people that when they run their long, slow runs, they're running 15 miles. They're out there running for a couple hours. They're not running 45 minutes. So I will say that is one major flaw of this study when they're looking at the long, slow duration group. 45 minutes is not long enough to elicit adequate stimulus that their body would adapt to and improve their VO2 max. If they really wanted to have a long, slow distance group, it should have been at least 90 minutes, I would say, and based off of their VO2 maxes, potentially even longer. And I think if they would have done that, the long, slow distance groups would have experienced a much greater increase in their VO2 max. And then the other thing, sort of in the same vein, the lactate threshold group, only 24 minutes, so you said 25 minutes of work. I mean, when I'm doing my tempo runs or my lactate threshold runs, I'll do like a mile, maybe a 1.5 mile warm up. And then once I start working, I mean, I'm working for 40 minutes, 45 minutes, depending. So again, people that have a higher VO2 max, you won't see their training look like this. So I think that's another major flaw. But so what should you do? And again, the answer is somewhere in the middle of all this. And the other thing is 15x15 and then 14x4. So they're very far away from each other. There are a lot of different protocols in between that. 4 minutes at 90 to 95% of your heart rate max is a lot. So I would not recommend people just jump right into a 4x4 session, or at least if you're going to, do not aim for 90 to 95%. because that's how you have a heart attack. If you're not used to running hard for 4 minutes, like that'll get you close to a max mile time trial for some people. Like if someone, or like 4 minutes is a very long interval. Whenever I start people on intervals, I might, depending on their running history, but let's say these people already have a pretty high VO2 max. I mean, I still wouldn't even just start them at a 4 minute interval. I would start them at like a 200 meter interval and work them up distance wise as, per week. Let's say they go from 200 meters to 400 meters and then 800 and then 1200s. And then when you get to the 1200 range or the 1K range, that's when it starts to look like 4 minutes, which is good, but I just don't think it's good to start there for people that are new. So typically how I structure out someone's endurance program, there will be 3 runs and each run will have a different protocol. Now they've already accounted for 3 of them in here, all 3 of them. So you have your long, slow distance run. Usually people do these on the weekends. So people are off work on the weekend, so they have a bit more time to get out there and spend more time on the trail. So typically on a Saturday, and then I'll do a tempo run or a lactate threshold run on a Thursday. And then I'll do an interval run on a Tuesday. And that's when you're talking about the 15 by 15 or you're talking about the 4 by 4. So what should you do? Well, I recommend that you check multiple boxes. Instead of just hitting the 4 by 4 and sticking to that, you should have a little bit of diversity with your program. Just like with your strength training, you should do a little bit of strength training and you should also have some hypertrophy work to try and build some muscle. And then, oh, by the way, you should have some power development in there to try and improve your speed, your ability to move quickly. That's very important. So very similar to that, your running or your cardio could look very similar to that as well, where you have your long, slow effort on the weekend. People typically do their long, slow run on the weekend, a Saturday or Sunday, because they're typically off work. So they have a bit more time. And again, people that have a higher VO2 max like this, they'll be out there for a couple hours. Sometimes, I mean, if they're training for a race, might be out there for 3 hours, but that could be on the weekend. And then you could have your tempo or your lactate threshold run, which is one of the ones they did in the study, on a Thursday. And then you could have your interval on a Tuesday. And so you're checking your speed with the interval, you're checking your tempo with your lactate threshold run in the middle of the week, and then you're checking your long, slow duration. And I think that in and of itself will improve your VO2 max. But one of the things that people don't think about when it's like, oh, let's just think about VO2 max. You could improve your VO2 max, but if you don't practice running for a long time, then you can't run for a long time. If someone only does 4 minute intervals and they do that 4 times, and then they go and try to run an hour out of nowhere, they're not going to be able to run an hour. They're going to hit a wall. And so, yes, you can improve your VO2 max, but running slow and running for a long time also is a practice that needs to be developed. It's a skill that needs to be developed. You have to learn how to pace yourself properly. You have to learn how to go into sort of the pain cave if it starts to get difficult. That's part of endurance. That's what the word is, endure, right? You have to teach yourself to endure. And that's a different skill than just doing some intervals that are going to be over soon. It's much easier to push through an interval because all right, just stick it out for another 60 seconds or so. That's a lot easier than, holy crap, I have 30 more minutes to go. Like, that is a realization in your mind that hurts a little bit. But I'm going to leave a basic program in the description. It's not the best program. I'm not claiming it's the best program. It's just something akin to a basic program that I would give someone that's running for health. Now, if you want to adapt it to train for a race, that is the potential for that is there, because it is sort of, you could think of it like a skeleton. So you can add a run to it, or you can increase the distances. This program is for people that are new. We'll say new to moderate, not people that are advanced athletes. Okay, so keep that in mind if you do decide to download it. But anyways, I think the take home here is, as I've showed you, there is evidence that having good cardio improves your longevity. Doing too much cardio can decrease your longevity indirectly, but you'll have increased calcium scores, increased rates of stenosis, all that jazz. And what you should do is have a balanced approach to all things, and it should be off of a good, better, best principle, where you're going for good and you're not letting best be the enemy of good, and you're trying to check as many boxes as you can. Because if you are strong, fast, have a decent amount of muscle on your frame, have good cardio, can run for a long time, long distances, but can also run faster for shorter amounts of time, I mean, you're going to be a pretty unstoppable human being. I don't think longevity is something you're really going to have to worry about. But anyways, that's it for me. My name is Randall James. Once again, I hope you're still here watching. If you are, I really appreciate you. I would love your feedback. If you have any thoughts on the podcast, then leave a comment down below, leave a like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. And yeah, if you're interested in coaching inquiries, if you end up liking the program that you download, or if you downloaded that other strength training program that I put in the last episode, then feel free to email me at randall@alwaysadaptive.com, and we can talk about offering your free session and kind of going through how to develop the program for you personally. And if you so choose, we could go forward with coaching and get into tutorials for all the different exercises and talk about nutrition and all that jazz. So if that fancies you, feel free to email me anytime. But I will see you guys at the next one. Thanks for watching.